This video is part of a series of videos on the Gospel of Mark. In this video, we'll be looking at the 4th chapter of Mark. There are several parables in this chapter, and two of them, the parable of the sower and the parable of the mustard seed, have been covered in other videos on this channel. You will find links to those videos in the description of this video. There is a third parable about a farmer planting a whole field full of seeds. Over time, he reaps a great crop. The lesson is similar to that of the mustard seed. It illustrates the amazing miracle of growth, whether it be seeds turning into life-giving plants or our lives being transformed by the faith in Jesus. Jesus promises a very natural yet very dramatic transformation in our lives if we will just listen to Him and believe the things that He says. It's not as hard as we might think, because God is the one who makes it all work. Then, halfway through the chapter, in verse 21, Jesus makes it clear that part of this process is going out and sharing with others what we have heard Him say to us. There are a few of the teachings of Jesus that are so special that they have their own name, and one of them is called the Great Commission, at the end of Mark's Gospel and at the end of Matthew's Gospel, where He tells His followers to go into all the world and preach the good news, teaching other people to do everything that He has taught us to do. Well, verse 21 is like that. Jesus asks His followers, is a candle brought to be put under a bushel or under a bed and not to be set on a candlestick? He doesn't bring us into His church just to sit around keeping a pew warm. All over the world, there are literally millions of people who call themselves Christian. Many of them go to churches more or less regularly. Some of the more devout believers will put a fish symbol on their car, wear a t-shirt with something Christian written on it, or even engage in arguments over various Christian teachings at work or in demonstrations on the street. All of this is seen as letting their light shine. But always, when they have finished whatever it is that they do to let their lights shine, they go back to their jobs, back to their families, back to their homes, and they live life pretty much the same as everyone else. Buying and selling, planting and building, marrying and raising families. That is not the way it happened when Jesus was here. Fishermen left their nets and their families. A tax collector left his job. They literally followed Jesus, eating with Him, sleeping out in the open with Him, going from town to town with Him. And people could see that something revolutionary was happening. In the 8th chapter of Luke's Gospel, he says that all these followers of Jesus, as they traveled around with Jesus, they showed the world what the kingdom of heaven is like. They were letting their light shine, without car badges, without t-shirts, without religious arguments or church buildings. Just by living together and by going from town to town, they were letting their light shine. They became a city set on a hill. They could not be hid. This part of the gospel message has for centuries been hidden from the masses to whom it should have been directed. Instead, we are told that it is our duty to make money and give some of that money to the professional religious leaders who will apparently do all the light shining for us. And we love to have it that way, because they tell us that we can keep the rest of the money for ourselves and all will be well. We are told that we can be followers of Christ without ever having to leave our warm, soft nests. After having told us to set fire on our candlesticks and get them out in the open, Jesus said in verse 23, "If any man has ears to hear, let him hear." And in verse 24, He adds, "Unto you that hear shall more be given." What are we doing with His instructions to let our light shine? Someone has said, you have to go with the gospel if you want to grow with the gospel. That means that you need to act on what God has already shown you if you want to hear more. But who is doing that? God wants us out there on the streets, in the highways and the byways, traveling from town to town and constantly proclaiming the good news as we go. He has given us a candle, not to be tucked away in a bookshelf or left behind in a church building. He wants those candles out there on the streets, day after day, burning our hearts out in love for the lost. And as we burn our candles, He gives us more, and the fire grows. And as a seed falls in the ground and dies, so it becomes transformed, born again into something so radically different to what it was to begin with that we can only marvel at the power of God. What is holding you back? Yes, it is dark out there, and yes, it can be cold and damp, but that is where we must go. In the last 7 verses of this chapter, Jesus does exactly what I have been saying here. He goes across the lake to other cities. My, how we need more people who are prepared to get up off their backsides, step outside the comfort of their homes, and go into all the world preaching the gospel. It is a whole new dimension to faith that is virtually non-existent in today's churches, where we leave it to the professionals to do all the preaching. In verse 35, it says, "That same day, when it was evening, He said to His disciples, 'Let us pass over to the other side.'" Notice that Jesus was not only prepared to make the effort to travel across a big stormy lake, but He was prepared to stay up all night if necessary to do it. It's not really like God is telling us that we cannot sleep or eat, or that we cannot have any comforts at all. This story about an overnight trip across the Sea of Galilee not only acknowledges that Jesus slept, but it also states that He was sleeping on a pillow, comfortable and at peace. You see, when you are prepared to make that first step, facing the cold and the damp, facing hunger and thirst, you may be surprised at just how well God does provide for your needs. Oh yeah, there was a terrible storm that night, one which could have drowned the lot of them. But Jesus was at peace and He was comfortable because He knew that He was heading in the right direction. No storm was going to stop them, not while they were doing His Father's will. So Jesus tells the wind and the waves to stop, and then He rebukes His disciples for not having had the faith to curl up and grab some sleep beside Him. You see, Jesus saw the storm as little more than a bluff from the devil. We have developed a conviction within our communities that when things look like they are falling apart, it is probably a sign that God is about to do something great. The devil is upset, and so the devil fights hard to make us panic. But God has it all under control, and we just need to sit tight and ride the storm out. It's quite exciting, really. So think about that the next time the devil tries to tell you horror stories about what will happen if you start taking Jesus seriously. Come on out in the storm with us and enjoy the adventure. If you want to be put in touch with others who have been doing this for several years now, just write to me at the address on screen and tell me where you live. I look forward to hearing from you. Oh, and if you haven't already subscribed, please do so now. Thank you.